Well, here we are in the Bournemouth Natural Science Society reference library room, looking at a picture of Charles Darwin, who started studies of the natural world in a big way. And we have our own naturalist here, who is a great expert in every aspect of local wildlife in this area, Jonathan McGowan. Jonathan, about yourself and your background and early interests.
I'm a native to Dorset. I've lived here all my life. I studied the wildlife intimately, from birds, bats, reptiles and insects, and so I know the patterns and distributions of most animal life in the area, and also in what way those ecosystems can be destroyed by impacts we have on our environment or other impacts. And when you look at the south coast in relation to Europe and the rest of the world, the south coast, such as Dorset and Hampshire, is the route into the country for many types of animals, especially birds and insects. Most of those birds and insects will be migrants coming from the south twice yearly into the UK. Where the Navitas Bay proposal is due to be built, unfortunately, is right in the firing line of migrant birds. In actual fact, if you wanted to make a trap to mince up all the birds in the UK, you could not put it in a better place. We have 3 or 4 different routes from mainland Europe into the UK that are distinct travelling migratory routes for certain types of birds. And I believe that if these large wind farms were to be built here, we would have a catastrophe regarding bird and bat life along the south coast. We've mapped out lots of routes where certain vulnerable birds will be coming into southern England, and one of the direct routes is between the Isles of Portland and Isle of Wight. It is there where the Navitas Bay windmills will be placed directly in the path of these migratory birds that come either for the summer or for the winter. So I see a lot of problems there could be regarding these issues. A lot of other people have worked on these issues also and compared it to other wind farms around the world where they've had horrendous mortality, in not just in birds but also bats and rare insects as well. In some areas, 1 or 2 bat species are due to become extinct simply because of wind farms. Some of the research done suggests that there are thousands upon thousands of birds that annually get chopped up by these wind farms, and the larger the complex, the more birds are likely to get minced up. The problems with Navitas Bay is that they're in an area where different winds funnel birds straight through between the Isle of Wight and the Isle of Portland, which is the main migratory routes into the whole of the UK, directly up through the south of England. It'll be a catastrophe. We'll be finding dead birds on the beaches in their thousands at certain times of year. Certain birds, such as raptors, that fly at certain levels are in direct line with the rotors of the height they will be, and birds cannot see, they don't rely on sight sometimes to migrate because of weather conditions. They've done things for centuries, for generations, so they know routes, and so it can't be changed some of the time. You'd have to have such a high mortality rate before the birds basically learn to avoid these obstacles. And we'd be seeing things like peregrine falcons, ospreys, divers, geese, all hit by these large machines, bats, and the thousands of migratory insects that come to the UK every year.
Jonathan, to be blunt about it, are birds more important than people? Is it really worth our while preserving bird life in England?
It's very worthwhile preserving all our wildlife in England, especially birds, because birds play an important role in all our lives. They take out millions and millions of insects. If you take birds out of the equation, you get a build-up of mosquitoes, for example. In a warming climate, we might have malaria in years to come. If we do not have those thousands of birds to eat those mosquitoes, we are putting ourselves in jeopardy. That's just one example in many, because there are hundreds of species of birds that eat all the insects that are pests on our crops, that transmit diseases to humankind. And of course, birds are nice. They give us a sense of well-being when we hear songbirds singing, when we see them flying. They are so important, not just for our well-being, but more important for the environment. So in one way we can say, yes, okay, there might be 9 billion human beings on Earth. We cannot live without the Earth, but the Earth can live without us. And if we start destroying the ecosystems in a big way, we won't even be worth living, because we won't have a planet to live on.
Jonathan, thanks for that. Can you tell me a little about the impact of killing a lot of peregrines, which are a relatively small population in total compared to sparrows or chaffinches?
Well, the peregrine falcons, which we have about 6 pairs along the south coast between Hampshire and Dorset, they regularly fly in and out of the sea areas. There will inevitably be deaths. Now, if a local pair of peregrines in Bournemouth were to disappear, the pigeon population would explode, and it would create problems. We know that these species need their predators to keep their numbers down, and without the peregrine falcons keeping the pigeons down, then there will be all kinds of problems.
If a peregrine falcon is killed by a wind turbine, is that the end of it? What is the impact on the nest that they are looking after?
Peregrine falcons, like many raptors, mate for life. The loss of one bird might mean failure of breeding for several years until that bird might find another mate. On average, falcons might have 3 or 4 young. They only breed once a year, unlike some of our smaller passerines that can breed up to 3 times a year. So they have a very slow input, and if they're very lucky, one of those birds will fledge and survive. So they are long-lived birds. 30 or 40 years a peregrine falcon can live. So they are slow at the whole breeding cycle and creating other birds to do what they do. So just one bird falling out of a chain could prove disaster locally for that species and the species in which those birds prey on.
Jonathan, thanks very much. I think, does this amount to a sufficient reason to stop the Navitas Bay wind farm project?
Well, the peregrine falcon is just one example in hundreds. There are many other species of birds that would have the same impact if lots of those birds were taken out of the ecosystem, you could say. These birds have only just started to make a comeback in the UK. They're highly protected by law for a start. These wind turbines will inevitably destroy many of those birds that are protected by law. So it's not just that species. There's over a dozen species of very vulnerable birds that would succumb to these windmills in a big way.
Some wind farms in Canada have now been given licenses to kill golden eagles and bald eagles without any penalty on a 25-year basis. Do you think Navitas will need licenses to kill the rare birds?
Navitas would know that they will be destroying protected birds, so they would probably require a license to kill those birds also. So it's one rule for one and one rule for another, it would seem, that these unscrupulous people can just say, oh, okay, we're going to kill lots of rare endangered eagles, we're going to have to get a license to do that. I think that's very morally wrong to do that, and I could see Navitas Bay having to do the same thing if they want to be lawful but then of course it's not lawful to provide licences to kill endangered species in the first place.
Jonathan, how can we rely on the people who are supposed to be looking after the welfare of birds, like the Royal Society for Protection of Birds and the British Trust for Ornithology and Dorset Wildlife Trust and others? How are they responding to this assault on the bird populations?
I think these conservation bodies feel powerless, because that's exactly what it is. These people who are in charge of these kinds of operations are so powerful with money that they can put their money where their mouth is, and unfortunately these conservation groups feel powerless to do much about it, or they feel that if they do not participate in somehow that they will be given a bad mark, and I think that they really do feel powerless. But I think the majority of them would not like these developments to take place because they know of the destruction. I think maybe they think that added up it might be a good thing, but we know otherwise.
Recently the London Array, which is already built in the Thames estuary, which is surrounded by immigrant red divers, for example. EON Company has refused to extend the wind farm on the basis that it might affect red divers.
Yeah.
Is this a noble position, or are they got other motives for not doing the wind farm?
They've probably got other motives. Talking about the red-throated divers, Poole Bay in the wintertime is home to probably half of all the red-throated divers of Northern Europe. And they come here and you'll see them between Studland Bay and Bournemouth, directly underneath those massive turbines. That's if they survive, of course.
So the proximity to all these red divers, based on the London Array experience, would be another reason for stopping the Navitus Bay wind farm.
Certainly, the red-throated diver is a fully protected and rare species. Its numbers are plummeting every year, and with all the problems migrant birds have, there are many types of problems. This problem could be the nail in the coffin for many species. We would start to see certain raptors disappearing. We will see geese killed in large numbers, like has been proven in North America, where hundreds of thousands of geese are chopped up every year. Golden eagles, condors, all these rare birds are being destroyed in the name of so-called renewable energy. And I think this is an utter disgrace. And the science is there now. The science completely shows that the destruction to the environment is too big.
Many of the birds that come through here winter here, but many of them fly far north to do their actual breeding. Now, they've got to make their way through a small forest of onshore windmills, which are planned to be increased by another 15 or 20,000 windmills across the UK. Is this going to distress these kind of birds?
Certainly so. There's a real problem with small inland windmills at the moment, chopping up birds and bats as it is, and these are just small scale jobs. And of course the migrants that come through the UK are in their thousands. They have to contend with the shooting and the liming in southern Europe. Before they get to us, they're exhausted. And of course birds that are on the brink of exhaustion and collapse do not manoeuvre or think properly because they know where they're going. With these huge turbines right in their way, there will be huge problems. We will see breeding birds in Scotland starting to go down, wading bird numbers plummeting, all kinds of bird numbers plummeting that come up via the south coast, such as swallows and swifts and martins, birds that are already having a huge problem due to the pesticides we use in the environment. This project will be another nail in the coffin for many species of birds, without doubt, has been proven in many other parts of the world. And in such a prime conservation area such as Dorset and the New Forest, the Isle of Wight and Isle of Purbeck, we cannot afford to lose any more of our wildlife.
Jonathan, there are thousands and thousands of twitchers in this country who enjoy watching birds and looking at birds, photographing them, putting their pictures on Facebook and Twitter. What do you think they could be doing to increase our knowledge of the impact of windmills on birds?
I think maybe a lot of these people should get together, because it all comes down to power of the people. You know, people power can move mountains, really. I think they need to know of the impacts, and of course many of these statistics have been hidden on purpose because these energy providers do not want people to realise the destruction they do to the environment. Maybe it should be better known just exactly of the impact these kinds of structures have on local wildlife, because it's not just the turbines themselves chopping up birds and insects, it's also the sound, the underwater pollution and all kinds of knock-on effects these devices have for the wildlife in a big way. Even the marine life is undoubtedly disturbed by the sound and electromagnetic fields and all kinds of things from these devices. So it's just the tip of the iceberg, really, of the destruction they can cause.
Now, Jonathan, you're a lifelong expert in not just birds, but all the insects and all the marine life and animal life in this area. What do you think the impact on other creatures is of severe reductions in the number of birds doing their job?
I think if after say 5 or 6 years, if this was allowed to go through, we would be seeing huge reductions in various birds and insects as well, because if there aren't the birds to eat the insects and the insects go haywire and all kinds of problems happen and they start to disappear as well, because it's a very sensitive ecosystem we have at the moment. It's on the edge, basically. It's teetering on the edge. Something like this would tip it, basically, and we would just see birds not breeding, and there will be great loss of many species of birds, you know, and bats as well, and some of the insects that are very important for those birds will also disappear as well. We have butterflies and dragonflies all migrate from northern Europe through the UK. Admittedly, some animals and birds do fly close to the water, but others don't, and it's been proven that the vast majority of birds probably do not fly directly above the water surface, and various weather conditions would cause birds to fly higher. So there's no argument there, because we know exactly in other parts of the world what these windmills do.
Let me ask you a final question, Jonathan. What do you think is the best way to influence the outcome of the assessment of the Navitas Bay wind farm? Should one write to one's councillors or write to the MPs? What sort of pressure should we produce? And should it be via the assessment process of the Department of Energy, or should we simply bypass that and go directly to the MPs and the Lords in the Houses of Parliament and the Houses of Lords?
I think it should be more political and I think we should go directly to the House of Commons and make our case there, because we know how corrupt a lot of these energy providers are. They will go to nothing to lie and destroy all the scientific data that we all have about these issues, and they will turn people's opinions. That's what they do time and time and time again. But all the science shows that afterwards that it's all a big con, basically like a big scam, and once a thing like this has happened, there is no going back. That's why we need to know before it even ever happens of the destruction that it's possible that it can cause, you know.
What is the role of the organisation Natural England? Is that set up to protect birds, or what does it do?
Natural England, basically it's a government department, and in the past maybe they were sort of like more to do with conservation, but more and more now we see corruption in all these local governments, and Natural England themselves are very partial to signing things off for some strange reason and destroying birds and animals because a certain group of people want that. So they've issued lots of licenses for the destruction of cormorants and ravens, birds that were once protected, just because some people's livelihoods depend on that. But our whole environment will be destroyed if we carry on going the way we are, and if we don't find different ways of renewable energy, and there are other methods to go down. We do not need these huge invasive wind turbines